There we go. It says I'm live. I've got to relearn this about every time I cut it on. They're switching stuff up. I've got a fan on, and it supposedly has like a background noise filter. So hopefully that's working. If not, if it's messing up the audio, I'll go switch it off.
Right.
Anyway, all right, boys. This is Dr. Steve Sammons from Auburn, correct? You're a teacher at Auburn? Uh-oh.
I am.
All right. Kill that. So tell us about teaching at Auburn. How'd you get involved with that, and how long have you been there?
So I came here in 2000 to do my PhD, and it just worked out. I ended up staying as a soft money researcher, really. And yeah, I've worked here ever since, and actually until recently, I actually have recently left to go on to the next stage, like you have.
Explain to everybody what soft money research means.
That means that I had to bring in my own funding and pay myself out of that. That's a common thing. A lot of universities do that kind of thing. Sometimes it's more of a temporary deal. And this just turned out to not be temporary.
Awesome.
I was the same kind of a deal when I was at Tennessee Tech University. And there it was before I got my PhD. And I was a what they call a research associate, and that was also soft money. In that case, really most of that money was brought in by the guy I worked for, Phil Batoli. And when I first transitioned here, Mike Messina, who was my PhD advisor, he kept me here, and I was working on some of his projects, kind of basically running his lab for him, essentially. And then I started getting my own money, and it was a mix for a while. And then I ended up bringing in enough money that I could just go out on my own. And he retired, really, essentially at that point anyway. And so I just kept doing the same things we had been doing. Yeah, I've just been very lucky, very blessed, honestly.
Yeah, I hear that. I'm assuming I'm going to pull my hat off and show it to the camera. This is one of the projects, right? The shoal bass.
Yes, sir. Yeah. That's right. Yes. So Mike always said that problems are opportunities, and so the shoal bass research came out of the blue. Literally, it came out of the blue. One of the last things that Mike did before he retired was Alabama had come to him and said, hey, there's this bass that lives in a few of our streams right around Auburn, right outside of Auburn, in the Chattahoochee Basin. No one has really looked at these fish like forever. And we weren't sure, how are they doing, kind of a thing.
Right.
And so he got that project. I had already been finished my PhD, so I was working for him as a research fellow, and I got involved in some of that research. I had fished for him, so had Mike. We had fished for them, a mutual friend of ours who worked for George DNR out of the Albany office. And that's when I did my PhD on Lake Seminole. So that was the office that was over Lake Seminole. And so I got to know him really well because it was their project. And so he fished for shoal bass in the summer on the lower Flint River. And he got his master's degree from Auburn, which is when Mike met him. And he and I had both fished for him, but we never really thought we'd ever work on them. And so to make a long story short, he brought this grad student in. We surveyed those 4 streams and found that they were gone from 3 of them. And they only existed in Alabama in a single 600-yard stretch of shoals on this one creek.
Really?
And what had been replaced them with was a whole bunch of non-native spotted bass.
Right.
And literally right as that project was wrapping up and the kid was writing his thesis, a couple anglers, one of whom, Drew Gregory, caught some fish out of the upper Flint River that looked an awful lot like spotted bass. And so now in Alabama, shoal bass were kind of a conservation fish because they were only found in a very small part of the state. They didn't have any major fisheries for them. And so the concern there was more, is this fish okay, kind of a thing. But it wasn't like, oh my God, people are fishing for this fish and the fishery's in trouble. But in Georgia now, that's a whole different ballgame.
Right.
So our research showed that, in the 40 years that happened between the last time anyone had ever looked in those creeks and when we did, the shoal bass went away and were replaced by these spotted bass. That's all we really knew. We didn't know why. Nobody was there looking, Right. And then literally a year later, they're found in the upper Flint River, which is the major fishery there, is shoal bass. And so obviously Georgia DNR was extremely concerned, thinking about what we saw in a large scale or a large time scale, over a large time scale, a long time scale. And all of a sudden, oh my God, now they're in one of our major fishery, the mainstay for this species. And so that's kind of when I got involved, because Mike was at that point had already picked a date for retirement and was starting to wind things down. And so Alabama gave me another project to follow up on what we had done. And it was like a stocking enhancement kind of thing. And could what happened if we stocked fish in there? And then Georgia also was like, we need you to come learn what we can learn about this fish, because we knew absolutely nothing about this fish. It's a bass that we knew nothing about. It's a bass that reaches 8 pounds that we knew nothing about, which is hard to believe in the 21st century. And so we need you to assess the threat of spotted bass. And so I had 2 simultaneous projects, one in each state, and that allowed me to do a lot of work on a broad scale. So Alabama, it's pretty much the Chattahoochee Basin, and in the Flint River. And so I followed up on what Mike and his student had done on those streams. But I was like, well, what's in the river itself where these streams are coming into it? And so we sampled there. And this was just, this wasn't like, I wouldn't call this science as much as just going out and saying, what kind of bass are in the Chattahoochee River, in Columbus, in Valley? What's there? How many shoal bass are there? Right. And so that was all that was. But that became an important part of the question, to be honest. And then in the Flint, where we have them, there it was like, well, what can we find out about this fish? And so we did a telemetry study on all 3 species, largemouth bass, shoal bass, the 2 native ones, and then small spotted bass. We were looking at them simultaneously to see, do they do the same things? Do they live in the same places? That kind of thing. I did a food habit study. That was just on shoal bass and spots. What are they eating? Do they eat the same kinds of things? We looked at their spawning timing, and do they spawn at the same times? And then just after that was just a basic age and growth and an exploitation study. How many, what do they keep them? Do they not keep them? That kind of a thing. So I was a blank slate because we literally knew nothing about the fish.
You had no data at all.
No, Georgia had sampled them. We had some, fortunately Georgia does sample its rivers. they had some monitoring data that was helpful. You know, and it was sampled every other year. And so I remember this exactly, you know, that was sampled on odd numbered years. And so the project literally kicked off in the fall of 2007 with me going out there with the biologist and saying, show me where you're sampling. I didn't know anything. I was a reservoir guy.
Yeah.
I fished rivers, but I never sampled them in my life. And so I'm sitting here like clueless going, you know, what am I going to do here? And so I'm like, show me how you're sampling, show me where you're going. And so in 2005, which was the last year they had before this project, they got 0 spotted bass. We went out there in 2007, 2 years later, and there were several other sites that was the dominant black bass already there.
Right.
Like that quick.
Oh, yeah, I believe it.
Drew, one of the ones, so I knew Drew already from like the Georgia River Fishing.com, the old fishing boards that they used to have before social media killed them all.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I already knew him, and I think it was in 2006 when he posted that picture of what was sure up a spotted bass that he caught from the Flint River. I'm like, oh God, that's not good. But still, to go from a couple random pictures to holy crap, here we just collected 30 bass at this site and 20 of them were spotted bass. Oh my God. I mean, you know, it was amazing how fast it happened.
Now, do you find that they're hybridizing with them or are they just
that's
feeding them?
Very good question. So what we found, because that was obviously one of the questions too, and that wasn't really, and I'm not a geneticist, but we did actually start taking samples, tissue samples of these fish. Sooner or later, we'll get them looked at, and we did. And so in the Chattahoochee, there's extensive hybridization. But in the Flint, it's been minimal, and they're not really seemingly out competing them. Thankfully, a lot of the stuff that we found was okay. They do have pretty similar diets, but spatially they don't overlap all that much. The shoal bass are really in their mainstays in the shoals, as their name would suggest. And spotted bass are not a huge fan of the actual shoals. They like fast water. They like some fast water, but they don't want to get right in the middle of a giant shoal, a waterfall, or anything like that. And so I think that helps spread them out. And reproduction wise, you know, the two fish kind of overlap in timing, but they're. Now all these years later, I can look back and say, you know, okay, they definitely do not spawn in the same areas at all.
Right.
But yeah, it was such an interesting study, just because you're not used to, you know, it occurred from 2007 to 2012. At that point, you never think you're going to work on a bass where things surprise you, like come out of left field, like holy crap, surprise you. You know?
Right. Oh yeah.
And it was a constant surprise. It was a constant surprise. You know, that the hybridization in the Chattahoochee River was nuts.
Right. Well, what strikes me is like I've been in both rivers, and you mentioned it prior. The habitat, there was just a few small places where the upper Flint River doesn't look anything like the Chattahoochee. There's a lot of riffles. There's a lot. And I wonder if that the difference in habitat's what's helping the shoal bass.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of theory out there about the effects of an invasive species is mediated by the quality of the habitat. You know, or how intact the ecosystem is maybe a better way of saying it. So the Chattahoochee is extremely altered. And, you know, there's at the time that we had started the study, there were 14 dams on the Chattahoochee River. 2 of them were taken out in Columbus, so we're down to 12 now. But in the entire Flint River, there's only 2.
Mm-hmm.
Happen to be within about 30 miles of each other. So the upper Flint River, where we did that study, it's one of the least altered river systems probably in the southeastern United States, especially a rocky riffle ones. Like there's a couple, the Altamaha River is one that comes to mind in southeast Georgia,
Sure.
that goes through a lowland swampy area. And that thing there's nobody that lives around there. There's no dams. That's a very unaltered system too. But that's a, lowland river, oxbow kind of a thing. And yeah, big surprise. With all the swampy area down there, it's hard to build cities. And so there's not.
Yeah.
But,
and it's hard for anything to survive the damn flathead catfish that are in there too.
Well, right, exactly. But but a rocky river like the Flint, an upland rocky river like the Flint, those are typically where people have built. And when I say typically, I mean these decisions were made 150 years ago about where are we going to stay, where we live in, and for some reason it's just got skipped. It got passed over. I mean, of course, the river itself starts underneath Hartsfield Jackson International Airport,
right.
So it doesn't exactly begin very auspiciously, but it goes through a swamp right south of there, and swamps are nature's big cleaning ecosystem. So when it comes out from that swamp, it's actually a pretty good river already.
Good water quality. Then.
Yeah, it has almost 200 miles of undammed river before you get the first dam. And that makes it one of only 40 rivers in the entire country that have that much undammed river.
I didn't know that.
Also very rural. So it's totally different than the Chattahoochee.
Oh yeah. And I also think too that part of the state, just in my limited experience with sampling around there, you've got better limestone, you've got better hardness and alkalinity around there.
I'm sure you do. I'm sure. Yeah. And so the spotted bass do not seem to be doing there what they did in the Chattahoochee. But there's still a lot left to figure out, to be honest. I mean, think about largemouth bass. We know an awful lot about them, and they've been studied for 70 years and probably 100, but I mean, intensively for darn close to 70 years. Shoal bass have now been studied intensively for 10.
Right.
Got a long way to go.
A little bit behind.
So there's questions about like the tributaries that flow into the Flint River. There's an area where the fish might be more compressed. Is that there's less diversity of habitats in these smaller streams, or maybe there's more of a problem. But the main stem Flint, which of course on the management level is the most important thing. If the main stem Flint still seems to be good. Georgia DNR still continues to monitor the river. They still continue to take tissue samples and do genetic surveys. They still find minimal hybridization. They find a few, don't get me wrong, but it might be 10%. And the Chattahoochee, it's more like the opposite. It's like about 60 to 80%.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I've been out there with them before looking for broodstock to bring into the hatcheries and then, spawn. And of course, you got to screen the broodstock. And I remember this one time we were in Valley, Alabama, and it was me. And I think if I remember correctly, it was my full-time worker that I had with me. And it was 2 Georgia DNR biologists. And we collected, I think it was 15 fish, something like that we all agreed were pure shoal bass. And they took them to the hatchery and ran the genetics. And like 8 of them were hybrids.
Jeez.
Yeah. And it's like, and we threw out a whole bunch that day that we were like, look at it, go hybrid. Look at it and go hybrid.
Hybrid.
So I mean, the hybridization over there is really crazy.
Right.
And, so it kind of matches that the hypothesis that when you're in an altered system, invasive species can have a greater effect on the natives than in a more pristine system where the natives are able to either outcompete them or carve their own niche away from them or something like that. And that seems to be on a broad scale what we're seeing so far in the Flint. And that's a darn good thing, because one thing that I have learned, I don't know, maybe some people knew this, but I had no idea how much people move bass around.
Yeah.
But,
Well,
I mean,
you took
I
the words out
cannot
of my
believe.
mouth right there. I was
Yeah, I
tie that
cannot
all
believe.
into reservoirs and bring that into like why you shouldn't be transporting fish. I say it all the time on mine. Stop moving fish around. Um, there's a great conversation to lead into that, because when you're bringing spotted bass into a reservoir, that's not a native environment for anything. That's a
No,
man-made
right,
lake,
right.
and I've seen it on Chattooga and other North Georgia lakes where there used to be smallmouth bass. The spots will completely outcompete them. They'll breed them out. They'll compete them out. They're gone. Like, you don't catch those
Yes,
fish there anymore.
right.
It's all 1 pound spotted bass. And
Yeah,
then to tie that into the catch and release phenomenon, now you've got a fish that you need to be harvesting, and nobody's keeping a bass. You can't
right.
pay people to keep bass anymore.
No, no,
So,
no, you're right. The last place people are keeping bass are still in rivers. Um, and, that was the one thing that we found out, that was another one of the surprising things, because, yeah, so like I said, reservoir guy, background was reservoirs. And I, grew up, if that's what you want to call it. I started my career already. Nobody was harvesting bass in reservoirs. I mean, that
right.
was a big thing. And then I do this exploitation study in the Flint River and find out that, harvest was about 25% there, which is what they used to harvest out of reservoirs. I mean, I was like, wow,
Right.
people, and these are shoal bass,
Oh, wow.
people that love shoal bass, they love them, but they still like to eat them too. I mean,
Right. Right.
and that was fine. It wasn't doing any harm to them,
Right.
but it was really surprising to see that, and then you spin back to the last shoal bass project I did, which was on the lower Flint just a couple years ago. Yeah, even down there, people harvest bass. They harvest largemouth more often than they harvest shoal bass. Largemouth, though, I mean, again, 20%,
Really?
about 15%. That's really
Wow.
for the 21st century. You're not going to find that in any reservoir, or really not even any small impoundments.
No.
So it's really funny. There's still some folks that like to harvest bass who fish rivers. That's
Yeah.
the last place. And
Right.
the same thing that happened will happen there eventually when, whatever generation that is passes away, and the new folks who are into all the catch and release and the tournaments and all that, are now your mainstay there. But as of right now, they still harvest fish, and that was really surprising. And that really, one thing that did for us was, one of the things I did for them in the upper Flint was look at the population dynamics and should they increase the size limit? And the answer was, yeah, you should,
Mm-hmm.
because we were worried about the fish going away. But I was like, the data clearly showed that a 15-inch minimum would increase the number of big fish in that population by a substantial amount, because
Mm-hmm.
harvest was between 12 and 15. The current limit then was 12. And so, and that's why that 15-inch minimum got enacted there, which is now statewide. And, the same thing was the Flint River. I mean, the lower Flint River is that, if you want to increase more 5-pound shoal bass, then a bigger limit's not a bad idea.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's one of the, but you can a length limit only works if people will harvest fish. Otherwise,
Yeah.
anything you want on there, right? And it won't
Right.
matter.
Yeah.
But
It
in
won't
that
matter
case,
if you're not
that
keeping
tool
anything.
was still available to us.
Yeah.
The guys in the reservoirs have given up on that. I mean, there is no such thing as structuring a population with a length limit anymore in reservoirs. That's gone.
Yeah.
Been
It's like
gone
these guys
my
keep
whole career.
blaming the biologists for all this stuff. And it's like the biologists can pass any rules they want to pass. If nobody's keeping any fish, you're not changing the population dynamics at all.
No,
So,
not at all.
you can
No.
make the slot limits whatever you want. If nobody's keeping anything, it doesn't matter.
Right.
And that just seems to be up here on these guys. They're just over their heads, and they have this false narrative of, the bank fishermen have harvested all the big bass out. It's like, no, you don't have any big bass because you haven't harvested anything in 30 years.
Yeah.
Duck.
Yeah, I really think that might very well have, so one of the things that we don't think about a lot as biologists, is the number of really big fish. You know, that's a hard thing to get at, to be fair, because we can't sample them very well. You know, 8, 9 pound bass in a reservoir, they're often offshore or doing something that you just can't get to them. There's not a lot of them anyway. I mean, you know, and
Right.
you know, so it's not usually, you know, there's exceptions, Texas, Lake Fork, a couple of the other places where that is a question, like how many 10-pound bass are there? But usually we're just worried about what we call size structure. You know, how many bigger fish are there versus how many little fish are there, and does it have a healthy looking number of what we would say 2 to 4 pounds, 2 to 5 pounds, and you know, yes, okay, then we're happy, you know,
Right.
and but and so the narrative has always been, and I'm not saying it's wrong, I'm saying we don't know. The narrative has always been catch and release is fine. You know, it's good, it's no problem. You know, you look at your data, and there's plenty of, you know, 2 to 5 pound bass in there and all that, and that seems to be true. My question has always been to myself in the back of my head. Sometimes I have these little things that just whisper in my ear, and it's like I don't know how you would even figure this out. But I wonder, a lot of these reservoirs used to produce 10-pound plus bass on a lot more regular basis. And I'm talking long after the boom bust part of it, talking about only like 30 years ago. And a lot of these reservoirs are 80 years old. You know, the boom and bust happened back in the 60s. So this is
Right.
past that.
Yeah.
Fala is one just down the road from here that, you know, just doesn't hold really big bass anymore, seemingly. And I wonder if harvest being zero, essentially. I mean, you know, the couple times it's been looked at, you're looking at like 5% harvest. I mean, that's nothing. Natural mortality rate in these lakes are like 20%. So, I mean, that's nothing.
Yeah. You haven't done
I
anything.
wonder if, yes, there's plenty of 4-pound bass in that lake, but I wonder if one of the factors as to why there's so few 10-pound plus bass in Lake Eufaula anymore is that, you know, there's just some lack of food resources. The growth slowed just enough, not enough to worry about 5-pound bass, but it's slowed just enough. And the natural mortality rate is high enough that almost nothing can reach 12 pounds anymore.
Right.
Because, you know, that 30% harvest that we used to have in that reservoir, you know, back in the 80s was allowing, you know, enough food resources for those fish to make that jump from 7 pounds to 10 pounds. And it just isn't happening anymore. I don't know that. I don't know how we would even figure that out. But you have to, you wonder about that, because what is the common denominator in every reservoir in the United States? And that is harvest is almost zero. And just in my lifetime, and really in my adult lifetime, it was 30%, 20 to 30%, just 3 decades ago.
Right.
And you wonder, does that have any effect on just the upper end? You know, no one could argue that, you know, it's affecting 5-pounders, but I wonder about the teens, the 12s, the 10s, you know, or even the 9s. You know, I wonder. I mean, those are old fish, and every year you're losing 20% of them just because fish die. You know, I mean, it's a numbers game. I mean, eventually, if the growth was a little faster, and you know, you had 15% of the fish reaching 9 pounds, and now it's slow enough that you only have 5% of fish reaching 9 pounds, that would be a big difference in what you can catch there. And I mean, population dynamics wise, sheer numbers, it makes sense. Now the question would be, how could you ever be sure that it's having that effect on growth? You know, if it did have that effect on growth, it's easy to model what would happen. But the question is it? You know, we don't often think about the growth of fish from 7 to 10 pounds. You know, we don't have a lot of data to even look at that. You know, when we look at growth of fish, most of it's based on fish from 1 to 5 pounds, and we just extrapolate it out. You know, there's 1 or 2 bigger fish in there usually if you have a good age data, but it's not the same thing as saying, well, let's hone in on literally the growth of fish between 6 and 10 pounds, and how fast is that now, and how fast was it 30 years ago? Well, we have no idea. But
well, if you can't stop them, you know, they're not there.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and so, but it's an interesting question. I mean, you certainly see it in the kinds of places that you work in. I mean, that's a lot more known. You know, that's a known quantity in small impoundments and ponds.
Sure.
That's a very easy thing. Like, there's only this many food resources. In this case, you have a simple, one of the problems with reservoirs, especially in the Southeast, there's like 50 species of fish that live in there. It's not just bass.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's a really complex.
It's a very complex. And that's why ponds, it's like, look, I mean, you see the exact same thing in ponds. I've had plenty of ponds in the, 10 to 30 acre range that you can catch an 8-pounder, no problem, like almost every trip on well-managed fishery, but it never produces a 12.
Right.
And then you get the guys coming to you. It's like, well, I'm catching 8, 9, 9.5, I'm catching those fish all the time, but why am I not catching a 12? And it's like, well, you've got some crappie in there. You've got some chain pickerel in there. You got a couple competitors in there. Different ponds, different scenarios, things like that. But getting those fish up to a really big size, getting them north of 10 pounds is a difficult task.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, all you have to do is just look and see, what management strategy consistently does do that.
Yeah.
Often bass stocked at extremely low rates with a lot of food dumped in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tells you all you need to know. That's
pretty much. Yeah.
That's the only foolproof way to do it.
Yeah. The only places that I've
magic.
seen, consistent 10-pound fish in smaller impoundments are gizzard shad is part of the forage base.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll get textbook information that'll tell you don't want gizzard shad in a small impoundment. But my electrofishing surveys have shown if you're going after trophy management, gizzard shad are important forage resource.
Right. No, I totally agree. And a lot of that bias against gizzard shad was back in the day when we were worried about the bluegill. It impacts the bluegill, but how many people? There are people that do care about bluegill in ponds, but they're better than I do. They're a minority, I'm pretty sure. I mean, most people, you're talking bass. In that case, who cares what's happening to the bluegill? They want something big to eat. It's that simple, I mean, that's there's no doubt that shad are a huge boon for these fish, for the big fish.
Mm-hmm.
A bass bluegill pond can only go so far.
Exactly. I'll be adding gizzard shad into my little pond this season. I've done it a few times on real small. This was only 2.5 acres, the one I use as an example. But I've added them before. They get to 8 inches in a year. They're very prolific. They're big forage, but I don't like starting the pond out with shad in it. I want a good, healthy 6+ pound fish population in there, and then I'll introduce the gizzard shad to it, and that's what'll happen this season. And to try to push get as much big forage in there as I can. And I think Clint's also going to use some rainbow trout. And that's real good for kicking the big bass in the tail end every spring as they're coming off. Those trout will get lethargic and die. For any guys who don't know, Dr. Sammons knows obviously, but you can feed the trout through the winter, have a nice fishery for the trout. Now they'll wreck your threadfin population if you put rainbow trout in with threadfin.
Interesting.
Yeah, I've noticed that. I think the threadfin, if you get a cold winter, the trout are just fired up and the threadies are kind of lethargic.
Right.
You get hammered. So if you have threadies and you do rainbows, you're probably going to have to do another couple $1,000s worth of threadfins in this early summer. That's kind of a pattern I've noticed. They don't seem to impact the gizzard shad as badly. I think it's just a more accessible forage for them, balled up on the bottom, during the
right.
day. But we tried. And I've noticed that about threadfins in the small impoundments too. We tried introducing them in the Sugar Hill Outdoors pond, and they just didn't take. And I've seen that before. They can be real kind of temperamental forage, really. Sometimes they go in and do great. Other times, not so much. And this is one of those times where they just, they're a couple $1,000 for a load of them. And then you don't get consistent forage production out of them,
Right. Well, I mean, I worked on them. I worked on one of the things I did in Tennessee on a reservoir was we were doing recruitment studies on a lot of different things, and shad happened to be one of them. And all those reservoirs have both. They have the gizzard shad and the threadfin shad, and they're very different animals. So gizzard shad, they reach about 8 to 10 years old, and threadfin are more like a 2 to 3 year old fish, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And so we did sampling fish larvae at night. And that was for a variety of things, but shad was one of the things we were getting. And we noticed that in the 6 years that I did the last 4, but still 6 years that project sampled out there, we had gizzard shad spawn in only 2 of those years. And the threadfin spawned every single year, because if you only live to age 2 or 3, you better reproduce every year or you're gone. And the shad are more like, if we don't like it this year, we're just going to wait until next year, kind of a thing. And so I would say in ponds, that's probably really helpful, because you do have the thermal limitations with threadfin. So, I mean, if you're a cold winter and all of a sudden they'll
whack them out. Yeah. And I've even seen heat kill them too. They'll die in the pond and when it gets too hot.
Wow.
Yeah. I've had them die during real hot summers. It'll kill them in a real fertile pond. I've had a couple fish kills on just threadfins got whacked out of there.
Interesting.
Yeah. Two trash can fulls of them, just destroyed them.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, but like you mentioned earlier, that reservoirs are these in the unnatural systems, and so both those shad species are river species that transitioned into reservoirs, but I mean, that's not their natural habitat, and I don't know how much and certainly when you start putting them in ponds, that's an extremely unnatural habitat for a fish that used to spawn and live in rivers.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's hard to say how they make that transition and what limitations they might have. But just with the life history of them, you get a little more wiggle room with a fish that can live to age 8 than one that's only going to live, maybe only spawn once or twice at the very most before it's dead. You have a narrow window there. If they have one bad year, then you have a really bad problem.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's great information, because you're kind of reiterating what I've seen in the field, with my experience. It's like there's just wishy-washy forage for a pond. Like some places they do awesome and some places they don't. And I don't know why, that's what I told Clint. I was like, we're going to try them, and if they'll do one of two things. They'll kind of be hit and miss, or they'll be awesome. But we're not going to spend thousands of dollars every year trying to maintain a threadfin population. We are going to put feeders on, feed our bluegill, and then throw some gizzards in there and see what happens, Let's see. We got one coming in from John. Let's see what he's saying here. Auburn genetics, brimming with gizzards, lots of bluegill, no threading of them. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, those small ponds, the only way you could keep threadfins in them is stock them every year, because we're too far north. The winters, they can't handle it.
Yeah.
In some of the bigger ponds on the station that were like 10 acres.
Yeah.
And we never really had a true winter kill, but what we did have is like you said, the water temperature gets to the point where the fish can't swim hardly. And they time to party, and they would hem them all in the back of the pond and just absolutely annihilate them and literally eliminate them. And it's like, we didn't technically have a winter kill, but on the other hand, they didn't make it through the winter. We're they're fine. Obviously, threadfins are fine in the reservoirs here, but those ponds get a lot colder in the winter than the reservoir does. You get a cold snap, and they can get into the 50s and even into the 40s, where that's the time that they start dying. When we were doing that study in Tennessee, that the larval towing stuff at night, right off the bat, like when we started in March, usually, because we were literally sampling like sawguys, and we were sampling crappies, and we were sampling yellow perch, and then trying to think what else we get, the 2 shad species. And So we would start kind of early to start catching the fish that spawn first. And right off the bat, with the water temperatures in the 50s, we noticed that we would collect a fair number of adult threadfin shad in that tow net. And then as soon as it warmed up enough, we never saw another one, because then they reached a point where they could outswim that net. But when that water temperature was in the low 50s, they could not get out of that net. And it was funny.
Yeah.
A little bit warmer, like never see them again.
Rolling.
Yeah. And yeah, so we often just think about dead alive, but it's more than that. The research that folks did years, I mean, this is before I was born. A lot of this was, where thinking about how will threadfins transition in the reservoirs, kind of a thing.
Right.
They literally, the temperature, their swimming speed is tied to the water temperature.
Temperature, right.
Before they die, they also they like, they're like geriatrics and can't swim very well before then. And that's not a problem in a reservoir, but in a small pond,
absolutely,
in there, they see an easy meal, and they know it's easy meal when they see one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what because those rainbows grow fast in the ponds. You'll stock them at 8 inches and they'll have them 2 pounds by the springtime. You'll get good growth out of them. So when it's cold and there's trout in there and they're fired up, because trout, just for guys who beginners or whatever, the trout are cold water fish, high oxygen fish. So they're fired up in the wintertime. They're active. And if there's an easy meal like a threadfin over there, lethargic from the cold, they just whack them. And it's not just like the largemouth too. They're going to take advantage of it as well.
Oh yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I've seen that plenty of times. And that's just one of the things because those threadfin shad are thousands there. You get 10,000 of them in a load. You'll get about 35 or 40 pounds of them. And that's a couple grand. And you need to get a good reproducing population of them. You're going to need a couple of those loads for a 10-acre pond. So you're looking at $4,000 to introduce threadfins into a 10-acre pond.
Right.
20-acre pond, $8,000. It's not cheap. Not chump change.
No. Yeah, I think you obviously have to make sure your pond is deep and pretty good sized. And you have to be far enough south. You have to be far below the fall line at any rate.
Oh yeah.
Because you just, you have to think about not only, okay, what's the water temperature? That's easy. Does it ever reach that? I think if I remember correctly, it's like 45 or 46 is the lethal temperature. If it gets below that, they die. Right? I mean, he's like, does it get that or does it not get that? But the other question is, well, how long is it that they're lethargic, and is there places that they can avoid the predation, or are they just going to get wiped out? Because I would have never believed it, but yeah, that one pond in particular I can think of is a 10-acre pond that they wiped them out. I mean, we would go over there and fish for them, because they'd have them all penned up in the back, and it was fish busting all over the place, and it was a ball to go out there and fish for them. But I never thought they would eliminate it. I mean, predators are usually not easy to eliminate something completely. But then we went there, and after we got out of this with the winter and started sampling again, it was like, oh my God, the threadfins are gone. I mean, they're gone. We never saw another one. And I was like, no, well, that was all fun and games, but now they're gone. I think we lost Sean. I just got something from Sean, said the power keeps going on and off. I don't know. Can you guys hear me? Or am I gone? For some reason, I can't join the chat. Oh, well, that's good to know. Well, I can answer some of those questions. While Sean tries to figure out his thing. Oh, see, he says, hold on, he's coming. Alabama shad. I worked on Alabama shad for a while. They're a super cool fish. They're probably critically endangered, to be fair. They are one of those critters that used to live in all the streams and rivers that flowed into the Gulf of Mexico, and they went way upstream to spawn. And then we started putting dams on all those things, and they just literally can't reach their spawning habitats anymore. And that was certainly demonstrated on the Apalachicola River, which is where I worked on them. They used the lock on Lake Seminole to lock the fish through, and it worked unbelievably. I would have lost money betting against that, to be honest. Once they started locking through, the population size just vastly increased, because where were they spawning? They were spawning up above Lake Seminole in the Flint River, all that beautiful shoal habitat up there. And so we know that was one of the issues, is that all the dams has really impacted that fish. They're neat. It's the only anadromous shad I've ever worked on. They look a lot like American shad, but they're endemic to the Gulf of Mexico, and they're a really cool animal. They live maybe only about 3 or 4 years, and they only spawn once and die, as far as we know. And let me see. Oh yeah, and the guy who's working with the alewife, I know, I'm familiar with them too. They were in a lot of reservoirs in Tennessee. They're basically the northern equivalent of blueback herring, and so they're a cooler water fish than any of the threadfins or the gizzards. They're a warm water fish, and so they have they're like perfect for striped bass, because they have about the same temperature requirements, which is similar to blueback herring. So in reservoirs in the summer, what do? They go deep, just like the stripers do, because they can't handle the epilimnion. They have to go down to the thermocline or below it if they can. But they're a cool fish, those alewives, and they're another one of the fish like striped bass that were they're anadromous fish that got caught behind dams when they closed them, and all of a sudden showed up. It's like, oh my God, they can live in fresh water their whole life, which is exactly how striped bass did. And as far as the Alabama shad, there was a lot of research that went on before they started doing the locking. They put telemetry gear on the shad, and looks like
Are you still doing your podcast?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Gosh. Looks like Sean's email or Wi-Fi got wiped out. So I'm not sure what that means. The Alabama shad thing, there was several master's degrees worked on that, and they did a lot of telemetry work to see would the fish move into the lock or not. They knew the timing, and so they would just lock the fish, or they would just run the lock twice a day, once in the morning and once in the evening. They would open the lower door for X amount of time. I don't remember exactly what it was. They used to have an attraction flow in there where they used a pump, and presumably the fish move in, then they would close the lower door and fill the lock, and then open the upper door for like a half an hour or something like that. And they used to have, we had radio tagged fish in there, so you could see them actually working, and yeah, it was pretty cool. It was pretty cool. So it was a neat study. Yes, you were right. So the Chattahoochee, lower Chattahoochee reservoirs, that would be Eufaula, Andrews, and Seminole, all have lock issues. Eufaula is the most severe. That lock is no longer operational at all. The last I heard, one of the two doors on the lock, I don't remember if it's the lower or upper, but one of the two doors on one side of the lock doesn't open anymore, but one of them does still. So that's, yeah, I don't know, you can get boats in and out that way, but you can get fish in and out that way. I don't know. So I haven't worked on the fish since 2014, 15, something like that. So I'm a little out of the loop now. But the last meeting I've been to where Corps of Engineers was there, they were looking into getting funding to fix those things. And I talked to one of the guys afterwards and said, hey, this infrastructure bill and all that kind of stuff, and you could use the conservation angle and try to get money for a conservation source to try to fix your lock, because quite frankly, if you can't lock shad through that lake anymore, there's one shoal right below the lock, and that's it, and there's 100 miles of shoals above the lake. So 90% of their spawning area is above this lock. If you can't lock fish through anymore, the last big population of the whole species is in the Apalachicola River. You're talking about endangered species here, and you're talking, will be an endangered species at some point. I don't know if they ever followed up on that, but maybe the lock fees keep scaring the fish away too. Who knows?
Hey, there we go. Am I back?
He's back.
God almighty. Yeah, I don't know what happened. I think somebody drove into the phone pole out there or something.
Well, I wasn't sure exactly what to do, but the comments.
I can see you. Yeah, the comment section saves the day. Thanks, boys. Let me scroll back and see. I know there was one that I missed. Yeah, it's not even raining. That's what I was. It's perfectly nice weather out here today. It's not even that hot. So I don't know what's going on out there. Probably Bigfoot out there hitting the. I live in the middle of the Ocala National Forest, so there's no telling what's going on.
Oh,
there
yeah.
John asked if the gizzards will eat feed. Will that show up? Yeah, there we go. Yeah, I actually see them get on the feed around the feeders sometimes, John. I don't know how much they benefit from it. Probably a little bit, but alewife. We've got some alewife in a Georgia lake. Carter's Lake has alewife, but it's a super deep, like 400 feet deep place up around Marietta over there. But other than that, I don't have much experience with alewife.
Yeah, like I said, they're basically the northern version of blueback herring.
Right.
They're both anadromous that also transition to completely freshwater existence. They both have a very cool water temperature preference, and so they have to do the exact same thing that stripers have to do. In the summer they go deep. And the reason why they could still live down here before reservoirs was how they avoided the heat by going back out in the ocean.
Yeah.
That's how it used to work,
Right.
And now that they can't do that anymore, they had to make something else work, and so they go deep. And so you have to have a pretty low nutrient system in order to have enough oxygen in the cool water to make it through the summer.
Yeah, I can remember the teachers like you at Georgia, before the bluebacks got into Lanier, they didn't know what was going to happen. That was don't be a bucket biologist and bring those things in here. But they actually had a benefit. The spotted bass have gotten bigger with the blueback herring in Lanier, and I think they're over in the one over in Ackworth. What is it, Altoona now as well?
Yeah, they're in Altoona. They're in most of the North Georgia reservoirs now. Now we have them in Lake Martin and Smith Lake in Alabama. Yeah, it's like anything else. Some fish win and some fish lose, and so this is an effect here because we don't really have them over here. But one of the things that happen in all the North Georgia reservoirs is, the spotted bass love them, but they wipe the walleye out. Because they're fish eaters. They actually eat larvae. Their larvae eat other larvae, and so the fish that are like walleye that have limnetic walleye or larvae, they had a problem. Why? So the funny thing about that, John, this is a great question, right? So Lake Lanier is from Mars, is the answer to that question.
Yep.
Not only have people keep introducing blueback herring all over Hell's Half Acre to try to recreate Lake Lanier, they're also introducing Alabama bass all over Hell's Half Acre to try to recreate Lake Lanier. And what they're finding out, to their intense sorrow, is that whatever wacky magic that happened to combine to make awesome fishing in Lanier with the addition of blueback herring and Alabama shad is irreproducible anywhere else.
Yep.
And we don't know why. No one was studying it. We have no earthly idea why in the world blueback herring and Alabama shad work together so well in that one reservoir and they don't anywhere else. But so Altoona is like Lake Martin, it's full of 2-pound Alabama bass too. It's not a place that has, giant 5-pound Alabama bass, and of course, Alabama bass and Altoona are native because that's part of the Coosa Basin. So,
Frank is asking about the shad, and I know gizzard shad. I've seen gizzard shad displace largemouth bass populations in small lakes, 30, 40, 100 acres. You can definitely several times. I can remember the first time it happened to me. I was doing an electrofishing survey for a homeowners association around Swanee. It was about a 40-acre lake. And I think crappie and green sunfish had fed down on the bass population enough that they just pretty much non-existent. And as soon as I touched the pedal on the electrofishing gear, the entire surface of the 40-acre lake just came alive with 20-inch gizzard shad. I'd never seen it before. Yeah, like the whole surface of the lake moved as soon as I touched the pedal. I don't know about why they suspend under the surface, just their dorsal fin almost out, I don't know what that behavior is, but and the entire lake just freaked out all at one time. What the heck? And as soon as I touched the pedal and as soon as I let off, it quit. And I was like, what in the world just happened? And I hit it again and the same thing again. And then it was just 20-inch shad after 20-inch shad after 20-inch shad.
Oh God.
Yeah, it was crazy. But I've seen that a few times. So you can definitely have a biomass swing towards gizzard shad, where the lake is just dominated by them. But it's rare. I don't know if that background noise is on my end or yours. I can hear it a little bit. Sounds like a tornado in my earphone.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'm going to go cut that fan off. Maybe it's the fan. Audio issues. You can do anything you want with video, but man, if your audio gets jacked up, nobody will watch it. I learned that a friend of mine that teaches this stuff. He's like, man, don't mess your audio up. Nobody will watch it.
Right.
He was dead on right too. Shout out to Kevin Roy, my friend. Thank God for him. He's helped me a ton in my social media endeavors.
Awesome.
Yeah. Don't mess the audio up. You can Blair Witch Project the video. Don't worry about that. Let's see. Covered that. Down on the Cape. The herring runs into the ocean. Yeah, we get them here too, man. Like the pogies will run in from the coast. There's threadfin out here. I'm on Rodman Reservoir in Central Florida.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Right.
So if you want to do some Central Florida bass, come on down, man.
He's 100% right about the shad. They get up in the smallest streams. It's really crazy. I mean, they really run way up, way more than you think they would, and very quickly. That Alabama shad. I didn't mention this, but we had tried to track them in the lower Flint River, and with radio track tags. And I mean, you know, you're looking at 100 miles, maybe. No backwaters, no nothing. I mean, it's there. You just should be able to drive a boat down the middle of the river and hear the fish. And we would catch like maybe 20 or 30% of them every week. And I'm like, what the heck is going on here? You know? And then we did another concurrent study with Alabama where we were introducing them. And so we tagged all the fish, and I had my best tracker on that. And we also had some stationary things, and we had some of those fish were moving 70 miles in a day. They would be here. Next thing you know, they'd be 70 miles down the river, and then they come right back up to the dam again. And I'm like, okay, I get it now. You know, so when we're trying to 100 miles of river, you know, we can only float about 25 of it. So it was like a 4-day float, you know. So when we float stretch, those fish weren't there. When we fished did that next stretch below, some of them had moved up in the stretch we just did.
Oh my God.
Stretch we haven't gotten to yet. And I'm like, holy crap. Yeah. So those things are amazing. I mean, they move way more than any bass or anything else I've ever worked on. And yeah, I've seen them in New Jersey where I grew up. I mean, this little lake that's off of Delaware Bay, it's technically is connected to it, but you couldn't take a canoe down to it, you know? And in the spring, there's shad, which are probably a mix of alewives and blueback herring and maybe American shad, although they're not big enough for that. They're more like that 8-9 inch fish, whatever they are, just swimming around in that lake. And I'm like, where'd y'all come from? You know, I mean, you're 15 miles away from the bay, maybe longer than that on some of these streams that are like, you know, knee deep. Like you go all the way up into this little 5 acre, well, it's about 20 acres. But still, yeah, it's crazy how far up they'll come. You know, if they just follow the flow until they get to wherever it is they're looking for. Neat fish.
Yeah, it's crazy here because the back of Rodman goes about 7 miles back. It turns back technically into the Ocklawaha River, and then it goes to hits the St. John's. But you're still like, it's an hour and over an hour drive to get to Jacksonville, where the St. John's goes out and hits the ocean. So it's like you said, it's 60, 70 miles probably over there. And striper run up here. Actually, if you just go over to, it's just maybe 6-7 miles by the way the crow flies, maybe a 20-minute drive, but it's called Salt Springs. You can see blue crab in the
Wow.
spring over there. Yeah, it's guys,
Crazy.
old timers tell me they catch flounder in this lake sometimes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Neat.
And the striper will run like right now. There's guys catching striper. They call it the blue hole, but it's an old spring. It's a huge spring that used to be like a camp down there where the kids could swim. It was really clear water coming in, like a real nice spring that they flooded when they impounded the lake. And I believe there's 6 or 7 of them like that in this lake. So it's very unique in that it was built for some idiot politician had the idea to run barges through here, try to cut them across Florida. So there's a barge canal that goes out to the ponds. Yeah. So you get all kinds of critters running down the barge canal and not getting stopped by the dam. They can bypass the dam coming down the barge canal.
Right.
And
away.
Yeah, it's an interesting ecosystem for sure, but definitely impacted. And I think that too, it produces a lot of 10-pound bass here. And I think that's one of the reasons why, because it's really not a contained system. You're going to get tons of from out of the ocean, basically.
Yeah.
So that's a unique environment for trophy bass management for sure.
Yeah, we while you were off in Bigfoot land, we were talking about Alabama shad and how they locked them through Seminole to get into the lower river. And, we never really followed up on this, but I mean, you don't really have to in a way. That you have this huge ocean run of biomass going up into your river now that wasn't before we started locking the fish through again.
Right.
And had to have an effect on all the local predators, shoal bass, largemouth bass, because they spawn up there and the young shad stay in that river for pretty much the whole summer before they out migrate to the ocean. And I mean, now there's all these 6-inch Alabama shad in this river, which are perfect to eat, that weren't there 25 years ago. Well, I mean, that's not true. So the funny thing is they used to lock through without us knowing it, because the lock on Lake Seminole used to be in pretty continuous operation. There were several businesses on the lower Chattahoochee that were using the barge canal or barging stuff back and forth to the ocean. And then when that went away, and that was right about when I moved here, I saw about 2 barges the 3 years that I was on Lake Seminole. So it was just about done, and then it was finally done. And so from 2000, let's just say, or late 90s anyway, until the late 2000s, that 10-year period there was almost no locking anymore. And that's when we started noticing that the Alabama shad population in the Apalachicola River was going downhill. We're like, what the heck is going on here? And that's what gave them the idea to, hey, maybe they used to lock through. Maybe we can get them to lock through again if we run the lock for the fish.
Yeah.
And it worked. Couldn't believe it.
Amazing.
I would have lost money betting against that one.
I would have too, but there's locks out here, and you can people call in and lock through during the week. There's certain times of the week you can lock through, and the locks will still work. So the fish are coming through there.
Right. Yeah. They definitely move through the locks. I'm really surprising.
Yeah. Midwest, good to have you in, my friend. He's a long-time follower. Heard a guy's running a 10-pound plus steelhead lake run rainbow up in tiny creeks. Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Yeah. That's awesome.
Funny, the fish, they sit. I think what they do anyway is they basically wait for a flood, and you would think that they would hunker down in a flood, but they don't. They're like, opportunity time, and they just zip off while the creeks are a lot higher, and then they just wait for the next. If they're done and they're going to go back, then they wait for the next flood, and then they just surf it down. But fish are amazing. The fish movement stuff I've done a lot. I've been lucky to do a lot of fish movement, and every single telemetry project I've ever done has been a surprise. Fish will move way more than we think they do. Way more.
Right. Yeah. And I've noticed that too on the emergency spillways on ponds. You'll think even ponds that don't have any feeder streams, it's a watershed fed pond. and then all of a sudden, the huge storm comes, the emergency spillway gets activated for a second where it's just flowing like a stream, around the dam. And the next thing you know, you've got fish that came up the emergency spillway in there,
Right.
and that people don't realize. They automatically think, oh, the fish are going to get washed out. And it's like,
Right.
no, the fish aren't getting washed out. But what you will get is competitors coming in from coming up that flow. And that's, the basic biology of the fish. If you try to run your hand backwards down a scaled fish, you can't do it. Its scales kick out like that. And
Right.
that's exactly how they use that to move up through that current. They don't get pushed backwards.
There's a lot of work that's been done. None of it's mine, but I mean, there's a lot of work that's been done on a variety of species that, the floods are cues for them to move upstream, and that's essentially, you go out west where a lot of those rivers, the flow patterns have been totally altered by reservoirs. Obviously any reservoir alters flow patterns to some degree, but here in the east, for the most part, or it's a lot less evident here in the east because we get 60 inches of rain a year, so they have to continuously get rid of water out of these reservoirs. It's not the case when you put out in the western part of the country where they get 20 inches of rain a year or less, and so they have totally altered their flows, and that's why a lot of those big river fish, the suckers and the minnows and of course the sturgeon, are having real problems because they don't get the spawning cues. If they get flows, it's not the time of year where they're used to getting flows, and so it is them up that those flows. A lot of the work has been done out there because it's been. Are we messing with the spawning cues of these fish? And the answer is yes. Because we're operating the reservoirs for humans, not for the environment, and they usually hold back the spring rains into the reservoirs is what they usually do, and then they release them to summer for agriculture or power generation or whatever. Well, I mean, that's not what the river used to do, right? It used to flood spring when all the snow melt comes off the Rockies. It used to flood in the spring, and it would be really low the rest of the year. So the fish are used to that. Now all of a sudden you're getting no flow in the spring because they're holding it all back, and then you're getting these flows in the summer or fall, especially if you get some weird storm that comes up that they get rid of. And so it's just, it's very altered. And so, but the bottom line is that flood patterns are definite cues for fish to move upstream, without a doubt. However they do it, the floods don't scare them. They go upstream against that water, no problem.
No problem at all. I can attest to that for sure. There's always a push out here to get rid of the Rodman Dam. There's always an argument about that. The one thing that comes to my mind, though, that I haven't seen anybody do any research on is the whole south of here, because the rivers flow north here. The St. John's flows north, for anybody who doesn't know that, and the Ocklawaha comes from around the Harris chain down there in Orlando, comes north, then hits here, turns east, goes across, and then hits and continues to go north. But there's also basically there's all kinds of man-made, from my understanding anyway, channels and canals to capture the stormwater runoff from Orlando. It's coming through here.
Right.
So they've completely changed the flow of the Ocklawaha because of stormwater flow.
Yeah.
I don't know. All that's complex. This gets punching way above my weight as to, whether you should remove this dam and allow that stormwater runoff to hit the St. John's or not. I don't know, but I know they mess with the water level on this lake big time. Like it will be feet different. And they don't really report to you how they're managing it, but I know it has to do with the rain, the amount of rainfall they're catching. That much I'm sure of.
Right.
But
I mean, they usually, reservoirs are usually operated as a system, and Florida, I'm not 100% sure, obviously, but the Tennessee River system is a perfect example of that, where they have a series of main stem reservoirs on the actual Tennessee itself. And then they have what tributary storage impoundments on the major rivers that flow into there. And so the Tennessee itself pretty much flows year round. They never shut those dams off. Let's just put it that way. I mean, they're always running some water through there. And if you get a flood, they run more water through there. But so that one, that works kind of similarly to the way it used to. And there, the dams are more of a question of blockage, but not flow alteration. But oh my God, some of those tributary storage impoundments, all the ones around Knoxville and all, they pull them down somewhere between 45 and 60 feet in the fall. And then they fill them because they're there to catch all the spring rains. And then they start releasing water through to keep the system flowing. But those rivers have to be completely altered, that's gone.
Right.
And the reason to do that, they're doing that is because they don't want Chattanooga to go underwater, which anyone living there is probably all on board about that.
Probably, yes.
But I mean, they used to get flooded all the time before they had this in place. I mean, Chattanooga's in a pretty low spot, apparently.
Yeah.
It would flood like nobody's business, and now it doesn't, because that's how they designed the system, was to handle all that flow out of the mountains in East Tennessee and then moderate it to go down the Tennessee River. So they operate the whole thing thinking what's going on way downstream. And so each one, they don't just operate, Norris Reservoir in a vacuum. I mean, they operate it as part of the upper system of that whole thing.
Right.
And, it's a lot more complex than we as anglers sometimes like to make it. It's like, they're screwing this up or they're screwing that up, or, they need to have the water higher during the spring and all that. And sometimes that's possible. And other times it's like, yeah, but you're running the risk of flooding a city.
Imagine the insurance companies would have something to say about that.
Yeah. I think we can all agree that the Bass and Norris Reservoir could probably spawn better if it was at full pull, by April 1 every single year, but the problem is that if you guess wrong, and if you fill it up by April 1 and you guess wrong about what kind of spring range you're going to have, then you're in trouble because you have nowhere to put that water. Because once you get downstream of Norris, it flows into Melton Hill, which is just a run of the river reservoir, and then it flows into Fort Watts Bar, which is part of the Tennessee River at that point. There's no storage. So once you release it from Norris, there's nowhere else to put it. So it's just going down. So you have to think about that kind of stuff. Even though Norris is way away from Chattanooga, they have to think about that. If they fill it up too soon and then they get floods and they have nowhere to put that water, then that's when people who are living along the river in Chattanooga should be getting nervous. And so they think about all that stuff. I mean, they don't want to necessarily screw up the bass spawn, but on the other hand, they don't want the Tennessee Aquarium to go underwater either.
No, they don't.
It's not as easy as we like to make it sometimes. They have a tough job, honestly.
They really do. And I've never lived in a place where the biologists take more heat than Florida. I've been talking to a few of the guys with the FWC, the Jason Dotson, and a few of the other guys around. I can't call their names right now because my memory's terrible, but I'm going to try to get Jason on and have a conversation like this as well. And I certainly try to back them up. I want to support with my platform as many scientists as I can to get better information out there. I think social media lacks that severely. And I'm real proud to have you on, Dr. Sammons. I appreciate
the opportunity. I really do.
Yeah, no, it's great. I've learned a lot tonight. I really appreciate it. And I certainly want to promote any scientists that want to come on or watching. You're welcome to come on and give your experience, because, my experience is very limited to just being a pond manager, and it's funny. I get all kinds of crazy questions like you're answering right now that I can't answer. That's punching way above my weight.
I've been very lucky to have a varied career, honestly. I mean, I've worked on reservoirs. I've worked on natural lakes, actually, in South Dakota. I did my master's on a natural lake, you know, and I worked for years on reservoirs in 2 or 3 different states, Virginia, Tennessee, and down here. And now all of a sudden I've been, you know, working in rivers and streams, and I had to learn all that stuff from the ground up. And I'm certainly no expert. I'm the ultimate jack of all trades, master of none. I've even done work on small impoundments as well in ponds.
Yeah, sure.
Lucky. I don't think I'm necessarily brilliant by any stretch of the imagination, but I've happened to have a wide variety of experiences that allows me to at least have somewhat intelligent responses.
Oh, no, that's great. I'd like you to touch on the differences between what you see in natural lakes and reservoirs, if you don't mind.
Oh, sure. I think the biggest thing you see in natural lakes versus reservoirs is stability, for one. Natural lakes are very stable systems, and the time frame of those things. So most natural lakes are from the Pleistocene, the last ice age. So they've been around for literally like 15 to 20,000 years in their current form, assuming that no one's put any new fish in there. And that's not always the case, obviously. But I mean, you know, theoretically, if you have a natural lake that hasn't been impacted by mankind in that way, then that's a fish community that is literally grown up together through geologic time. And so it's perfectly in balance. And they're very simple systems in that way. And that's not true of like the Great Lakes. Okay, they're a very complex system. But your average inland natural lake, you know, all of which are up in the north, because for the most part they're glacial, so you have to be up where the glaciers were. And so, you know, like I worked on a 17,000 acre lake in South Dakota. It had 9 species of fish in it.
Really?
No bluegill, no sunfish at all. Actually, it had crappie. It had black crappie in it. It did not have any bass. It had northern pike, walleye, yellow perch, and then like white suckers, fathead minnows, Iowa darters, and maybe 2 or 3 other smaller fish. And it's a very simple system. And so they're basically, you know, when you manage them, they're like giant ponds. You can sample the fish population. You can look at their growth and look at how fat they are, and you can pretty much guess what the situation is up there. You know, if it's a lake that's not over reproduced or you know over recruited or anything like that, then your fish are fat and they're growing pretty fast. You know, on the other hand, you know, those bullheads are in there. Black bullheads was their big thing. There were some of these natural lakes near the school, like a smaller lake, 300 acre lake I can think of in particular. It had a stunted population of black bullheads, 1 million bullheads that were 8 inches long, or maybe 6 inches long. I mean, it was just unbelievable. I mean, you pull up a trap net and there'd be 150 of them in there, and it's like, you know, and you know, their relative weight, their plumpness was really low, and their growth was kind of nasty. And if you know, you could assess things so easily up there. And then in the reservoir, it's much different. You know, you have these boom and bust recruitment scenarios of everything in there. You know, bass will be a great year one year, and the next year they won't. Shad will spawn great one year, they won't the next. Crappie only spawn every couple years, you know, and so everything's constantly in flux. You know, the shoreline of a natural lake is pretty much the same shoreline that was there before Europeans came. The shoreline of a reservoir just depends on A, what time of the year you're there, and B, what year you're there. How much rain have we had? You know? You know? So they're very different. You know, you don't have any river channels in a natural lake. It's just this bowl usually that's carved out by glaciers, and so there's deep parts and shallow parts, and you know, the little bays here and there. But one of the things that we measure in reservoirs is what we call retention time, which is basically how long it takes a molecule of water to enter and then exit the lake. You know, so that kind of separates reservoirs into main stem reservoirs and tributaries reservoirs. Main stem, your retention time is usually a matter of days or weeks, maybe a month, you know. And in a tributary storage impoundment, it's more like months or years. And in natural lakes, it's like centuries.
No kidding.
You know,
Wow.
I mean, it's very, very different. I can't remember anymore like what it was for Lake Superior, but it was like 300 years or some crazy thing like
Oh
that.
my God. Yeah, imagine.
And so it's just a much, much different environment. And you know, I learned more. I learned them in the class more than I got to work on them, because it was just 2 years and I was gone. And I fished them. I've gone up in Minnesota and fished some of these wonderful places, and you know, but it was neat to see for sure. But yeah, they're the most stable system that we have is natural lakes, and then I've also worked in streams that are the least stable. You
Yeah.
know,
Oh my God.
they
No kidding.
flood all the time, and
Yeah.
so it's been an interesting career. Let's just put it that way. I've been blessed to work on a lot of different things.
Well, that's really cool information. That's I just learned a lot right there. I'm gonna be stealing a lot of that from you.
That's fine.
All right, let me go back to make sure I didn't miss any questions in the chat here. They're just talking about tips on York River largemouth. Anybody? Josh is asking. I don't know the York River.
No, I know it's in Virginia.
Yeah. Can't help you there, boss. Oh, they got the bass. That's what you do, man. That's what I did, Josh, when the Elite Series came to Rod. Well, they came to the St. Johns River, but I ran down to the barge canal, and I was shocked by the number of Elite Series pros that ran into Rodman for the tournament.
Wow.
Yeah, Clun came by, and almost the whole. Now the guys who won actually went into Salt Springs, where I was telling you about, where the blue crabs are at. They pulled the winning bag out over there. Yeah. On trick worm, supposedly. But
cool.
Yeah. I was doing a lot of marking waypoints when the Elite Series guys came here, because they were all up and down the barge canal on the lake right here. Helped me out a ton on some new holes.
Oh, it looks like Grimy Fishing backed me up on that one. Thank you.
400 to 500 years retention.
It's been an embarrassingly long time since my limnology class, but I remembered it was centuries. That's as best I can.
That's amazing, man. But my God, how much water is that? I don't even want to know how many acre feet.
Oh yeah.
But I use retention time in ponds. It's important to understand that. If you have less than 30 days on a pond, you can't fertilize. Fertilizer is not an option for you.
Right.
You'll be your water exchange will be too high. And then if you're in Georgia where you would be fertilizing, and that's another thing, like I get guys having panic attacks that are up north talking about using phosphorus around the water, but of course they're in an area where you can't do that. They've already got really dense plankton blooms and high productivity. Whereas I'm in the exact opposite situation in Georgia. We're on the low end of the productivity scale. But even then, like there's many, many ponds that I managed that fertilizer wasn't an option due to the retention time of the pond. It's just, it flowed out too fast and all the fertilizer is up in the creek behind it. So there's no point in using it. And then that's where your feeders come in. You just straight up feed the bluegill and boost your productivity that way. I thought we might be in that situation at Sugar Hill, but it actually keeps enough of a retention time that we use a little bit of fertilizer and a little bit of feed at the same time. To do okay. But that certainly can be a problem, is too much water flow on small ponds and big watersheds. It'll drop your productivity.
Yes, definitely. It has to. Yeah. That like you said about that 30 days, the reservoirs that have a less than 30-day retention time, the phosphorus does not fully express itself in like chlorophyll A and stuff like that. It just doesn't. And so sometimes that's a good thing.
Right.
Because, I remember when I was in Tennessee, I heard the story from Phil Batoli about the late 80s. There was some big drought that happened, and Kentucky Lake, the largest reservoir on the Tennessee River, actually stratified for like the first time ever, and they had a massive fish kill because it's a very productive system, but it's okay because if it doesn't stratify, you don't have any low DO. You know, it just continuously mixes, and all of a sudden it's stratified, and the hypolimnion went anoxic in like literally like 4 days.
Oh wow!
And a massive fish kill that they've never seen before, and I don't think they've seen it since. But you know, it's you know, one of the big differences between main stem and tributary storage impoundments in terms of fishing is the lack of stratification, which means you don't have to worry about, you know, nutrients and cold water habitat and all that kind of stuff because it's mixed. So it means that a lot of them, you don't have giant stripers, for instance, because it gets too warm for them eventually, but you also don't have fish kills. And, you know, these tributary storage impoundments, if they aren't deep enough, like Allatoona being a good example, it's not a very deep of a reservoir, you know, if it stratifies, it loses its hypolimnion, cool water, high DO habitat just goes away really rapidly, and then there is none, and so it limits what you can do with stripers. You know, it's not going to be a place with 40-pound stripers. They just can't. The older they get, the lower temperature they need, and so, you know, you can get away with things in tributary storage impoundments that you can't get away, or you can get away with things in main stems that you can't get away with in tributary storage impoundments because it doesn't stratify. So, but yeah.
Oh, my guy Stephen Patrick in here talking smack, I see.
Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy.
He's talking about out fishing people. I don't think that's ever happened to me. What about you, Steve? You ever been outfished by Patrick?
I've only fished with Patrick up in Quetico, and I can hold my own with him up there because I did more than he has.
Yeah.
Well, the last time I caught one down here,
10 pounds in Georgia, I was with Steven. He wasn't happy about that. I remember that day well.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't want to fish with him down here because, you know, of course, this was pre Mr. Patrick with kids and all that other stuff when he was just a maniac, got married. You know, I definitely wouldn't want to try to go against him there because you can catch a fish out of a freaking teacup, man.
I'm telling you, he's a good fisherman. We've done a lot of fishing. Stephen was my roommate in college for a year.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good dude.
What I don't know what you're referring to on the slam, Stephen. You must be talking to Dr. Sammons.
Elusive slam? What's elusive?
I don't know. I don't know what he's talking about.
I mean, the only slam I know about is the bass slam.
I haven't tried for that one yet. I did though when we went to the to Drew's kayak tournament is where I got to talk to you and took that information from your little your speech on the shoal bass, and that was critical information for me. I actually landed a real nice one.
Excellent.
18, little longer than 18.
Nice.
And yeah, I took it on a fly rod too, so I was really happy.
Very nice.
Yeah. I was the only guy out there with a fly rod, so I felt good about my chances, and I was right. I only got to fish half a day, but I'm looking forward to getting back up to the Upper Flint and doing that again. What a beautiful river, you know. Just it doesn't even look like it's in Georgia almost. Yeah.
No. Oh, that slam.
Oh, that one is. You remember
that's
that
only
one?
Elusive because that lake that we fished has very few Lakers. I'm told there's lakes up there. You can do that a lot easier. I don't know, but yeah, he went with us on that one spring trip. That's still the only time I've ever caught Lakers up there. This fall, 150 feet of water, and you can just forget it. You're not catching them out of a canoe. But
right. Yeah.
Well, my God, Patrick, that was 20 years ago, dude.
Well, that's his deal, man. The dude has a mind like he's balling out of control with a memory. He does that crap to me all the time. He's like, yeah, you remember we did this thing with Dale. Do you know Dale Jones?
I don't think so. No, sir.
He had a project at Georgia. And me and Steven were the only two people stupid enough to sample 36 streams twice a year with Dale. And he can remember every single stream, every single thing we did, all of it. I don't remember any of it, you know. And he's like, "Oh yeah, you remember that day we were on such and such creek? We sampled this many fish on that day, and we picked up this and that." I'm like, "No, I don't remember any of that, Stephen. Not all of us have a photographic memory."
Oh man.
Yeah, right. Oh man. No doubt, man. I do remember that day. We almost died. But I also remember too, she didn't like me very much. She didn't understand my sense of humor at all. But the first time we were allowed to, Dale was a little bit protective of the backpack electrofishing equipment. And we were sampling a section of streams, like 100 meters of stream. We had to do it twice a year. And then one day, we called it pleasure shocking. He would turn us loose if we had any battery power left. And I was like, "Give me that thing." And I went and stuck it in an undercut rock and pulled a nice trout out from underneath the rock. I think it was 18 or 19 inches long. It came rolling out from under the first time I touched a backpack shocker. And then once that happened, that's how you volunteer to run a backpack shocker for the rest of your life.
Oh.
Yeah, I got strapped with that thing every single sampling trip after that. Yeah, and Stephen was referring to a day we got caught out in a storm, and it was we shouldn't have been sampling in the stormwater runoff, and she about got washed down river. I had to pick her out of the water wearing a backpack shocker.
Nice.
He tried to get college help for free on that project.
Sure.
And yeah, that didn't work out for Dale. He had to start paying us to go do that stuff. He couldn't get a lot of work.
What you should be doing. Oh my gosh. Yes. Yeah.
So people came all of one time, got a piece of that, and then wanted no more, you know. But my experience with stream sampling was that project. And I was, like you said, I've been very fortunate in some of the projects that I've done just to get enough experience to be able to talk about it at least, you know.
Right.
Thanks, Frank, man. Frank's been a long time follower, grimy fishing there. And he's a good dude, old Frank. Yeah, the war paints. And that, you know, talking about that, it was very interesting to see the diversity in species, because it was a study that we would do the forested watershed, then we'd come down, do like around agriculture, and then into urban, and it was broken up.
Yeah.
And it was very interesting to see the differences in species diversity from the forested. And actually, you would think that the urban watershed would have the lowest, but it wasn't, man. The agriculture, where the cows would impact the streams.
Oh yeah.
You would see the diversity of species plummet around the agriculture. And then wouldn't be bad, too bad. There'd be a lot of trash and tires and whatnot in the urban streams, but still the species diversity would jump back up. And kind of interesting.
Yeah, I've done some work in downtown Columbus that I've been very surprised at the diversity in those streams right in Metro Columbus. And you know, they're and some of the bass in those streams are amazing.
I'm telling you. Yeah.
You know, I was like, you know, 3-pound bass in some of these streams that are like right next to a industrial park. And I put up a series of those videos this past week, actually.
Yeah, I've been watching those. I've been enjoying watching the stream sampling stuff. For anybody who's not following Dr. Sammons on his YouTube, go check that out. He's got some cool stuff going on over there. Yeah,
it was neat. It was neat it was just something I backed into, honestly, but it's been, every time I've done those streams, I've been impressed.
Yeah. It's cool. Frank was talking about this blending the science, and that's a really good point. You know, I think if you look at scientific sampling through an angler's eyes, you can learn a lot. I think it certainly helped me. No doubt about it. But with that being said, we're running pretty long at 1:40, and I certainly appreciate everyone's interaction and comments and things that they've done. But I'm gonna cut it off on you. Sorry about the technical difficulties.
Oh, that's okay.
Central Florida nonsense. I'm gonna go. Like I said, I think it's a Bigfoot issue or something. I'm not sure. Absolutely appreciate.
We'll do it again whenever you want.
Yeah, anytime. I'll come back and then we'll do it again. And you guys throw me some comments, throw some questions in there, and we'll try to answer those on the comments section in YouTube. And definitely want to have Dr. Steve Sammons back on. I learned a lot. I really appreciate you coming on and giving us your time.
Oh, I appreciate the opportunity. I certainly do.
All right. Thanks, man. And again, for you guys who don't follow Dr. Sammons, go check out his page. Does it have a specific name? I don't.
It is Black Bass Talk.
Black Bass Talk on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
Go learn from an actual fisheries doctor.
I'm trying to put a wide variety of stuff out there. If you want to know how length limits work, I've got some stuff up there right now that you can take a look and see why they work and why they don't. And I'm about to put a 2-parter on an actual length limit change in Lake Eufaula and why it was done and how it was done, why it needed to be done, how it was done.
Yeah.
So try to pull
hopefully
stuff like that if I can, so you can anglers should understand this kind of stuff because it affects them, and they should. Absolutely. I hope they understand that it's not random. They don't pick a number out of a hat or use the magic 8 ball.
No. That'll be very interesting. I'm looking forward to looking at that.
Cool.
All right.
Well, thank
you. All right. Thanks again, Dr. Sammons. I'll talk to you soon.
Absolutely. I really appreciate it, Shen. And thanks for everybody with all the great questions.
Yeah. Awesome stream. Good one tonight, boys. Thanks a lot. All right. I'll talk to you guys later. Next time, next Sunday, we'll do it again. Thank you, gentlemen. All right. Let's end it off. And it